After some feeble efforts, too few and far between to count, Daimler has finally brought its very first proper production electric vehicle to the market. That is, the advent of its new EQ range of cars, which begins with the new Mercedes-Benz EQC. The car is a mid-size SUV and tries to go to the heart of the market by cashing in on a segment that counts. Hardly surprising given it was preceded by the Audi e-tron, the Jaguar I-Pace and the Tesla Model X, pretty much in that reverse order. And that is the immediate rival set it must take on, even though all these cars are of varying sizes. Not quite the same as the EQC, but they're all EVs and therefore form the consideration set for any potential buyer right now. The EQC is also an SUV after all, and yes, is all-wheel drive.
In terms of shape, size, silhouette, and most important, platform, yes, this car is very similar to the GLC because it is based pretty much on that car. And the reason for that, obviously because it shares a lot with that car. Now, you could argue that Mercedes-Benz could have gone absolutely back to the drawing board and started from scratch, developing an all-new platform for this car, like some of its rivals have. But the bigger thing here is this car is therefore hitting a sweet spot. It had to be an SUV, right? I mean, in many ways, that's what the buyer is really looking for. It also gives you more flexibility in terms of being able to play around with space, especially for cargo, and also where to put the battery.
The 80 kilowatt-hour battery is placed in the floor and is slim and not extended all the way to the car's side edges. Mercedes says that is a safety precaution, even though it meant compromising on battery size somewhat. The car puts safety ahead of all other development, and there are many thoughtful design elements that become obvious as a result, since the aim was to make the car as crash safe as the GLC, the car it's based on. As a result, you still get a generous 500-litre boot too.
So unfortunately, it's been a cloudy, rainy day, but we've got a little break, so it's a nice time for me to quickly talk about the styling. It is this face that's going to get your attention straight away because it's different to the rest of the Mercedes-Benz lineup, and yet, first glance, you straight away know it is a Mercedes. So this is what we've seen with the concept car, and it's pretty much the same styling that's been carried into the production version. Lots of LED lighting, signature for the DRL, and lots of use of blue as well. There are lots of blue elements all around the car, and of course some of that depends on what trim you choose to go with. This particular one also gives you some blue in the alloy wheel pattern, so that's kind of nice because that's a little bit like the concept car too. And then of course the EQC badging also done in blue.
I don't love that front grille, especially the big thick chrome surround, but the EQC will get your attention for sure. The rear is beautifully proportioned, and that LED taillight across the whole rear door, well, in keeping with the new styling trend across brands really. Inside, the EQC is familiar Mercedes territory, though the use of colors and materials, again with a blue bias, is specific to this car.
Use of great materials and great fit and material quality as well. That's to be expected. And there's lots here that will remind you of all the other Mercedes-Benz cars, especially the newer ones, which means, of course, you get this twin display, this big screen, and you also get, thankfully, MBUX, which is the latest interface and not the command one, and to set it apart from some of its usual combustion engine versions in the family, well, you've got a few little bits that are a little distinct, especially the use of this little bronze element through the AC vents and then also around the dash. So that's really different as well. Besides that, you get pampered by the Burmester sound system. You've got the new head-up display, which has a nice wide, very detailed view, which is full color. And of course, hey Mercedes, start the
How may I help you?
Start the massage function.
What can I do for you?
Start massage.
I'm switching on the massage.
There you go. You get pampered by even talking to the car, but then you've seen that on the new GLE. Of course, the EQC gets that too.
There are also voice commands specifically for all things electric, so you can set charging settings and ask the car to find charging stations nearby or only charge up to 80% of the battery, for instance.
Now, most of the underbody and suspension is also a carryover from the GLC, but more important to note here is that there are a few things that maybe could have been done differently had this been a completely fresh development. And there I'm talking mostly about cabin space, because if you compare this to its immediate rivals, especially a car like the I-Pace, for example, which is a smaller car, you get a much more generous wheelbase on that car, and so better cabin space. Now, I'll tell you why that's happened. First, like I said, it's the existing GLC platform. But second, the car also replicates the GLC in some terms, because Mercedes was very obsessive about keeping safety standards at the same level. And so I'm talking about the replica of an engine that's up front, a replica even of the transmission and gearbox, and so which is why you even have the tunnel, which, well, doesn't give you the flat floor space of its rivals, but certainly gives you, therefore, the same crash capability.
The electric drivetrain comprises two asynchronous motors, one on each axle. This gives you all-wheel drive or 4MATIC capability too. There is dynamic torque distribution between the two axles, but to maximize efficiency, the two motors have been configured differently. The motor at the front axle works on medium to low loads and is tuned to derive the most efficient performance. The one at the rear is all about dynamics and power. That is why on the highway at higher speeds, there is a rear bias. Combined output stands at 400 bhp with 760 Nm of peak torque available instantly.
Some advantages, some disadvantages of using the GLC platform, and they are pretty obvious. I think the big negative for me is that this is a 2.5-ton car. Feels like that straight away on the road. It gives you this sense of being really heavy, and especially if you compare to the immediate rivals. I mean, smaller car like the Jaguar I-Pace, bigger car like the Audi e-tron, and even bigger, the Tesla Model X. They're all lighter than this one, and that's kind of obvious, both when you're turning in on a sharp turn at a higher speed, and even when you're just kind of chugging along or cruising along or pottering about even in city traffic. What's the good bit? Extreme sense of refinement. I mean, what you expect from a Mercedes-Benz in terms of quality, a nice quiet cabin, all of that comes through straight away. Sound damping is great. You don't get a sense of the road noise. Even the annoying whine of the electric motors doesn't come through. And so it's very nice and luxurious feeling. And that kind of premiumness is always a positive.
Monitoring the remaining battery and therefore the driving range is easy enough too, with clear and precise readouts on the instrument console. And so I decided it was time to top up the battery, and so found the nearest fast charging station. Getting it all done in the rain was not very appealing, but hey, at least I can now put those doubts to rest, where people think an electric car and water don't mix.
All right, so here I am at the fast charging station. Now, when we picked out cars this morning, we had three options: to go with a car that was full up, 100% charge, a car that had 60% charge, so you can drive it for a while and then maybe later in the day experience the whole charging thing, or a car with just 30% charge, which means get straight to the charging station. That's the one that we actually selected because we wanted to get a sense of how this part of it actually works. Let's actually find out then. All right, so the way it works is you could have a preloaded card, and there's also the phone app. So two ways to get this thing going. The most important, of course, is to always ensure that you have enough of a charge before you get out on the road. All right, so first things first, pull that out and in that goes. All right, and next thing, just tap the card and hit start. And that's it. It's as simple as that. Now, of course, is the part that you're interested in knowing. How long before the car gets to a full charge? Well, typically you work on an 80% assumption, and that takes about 40 minutes. Right now I can see it's going to take about 44 minutes, and so I need to do something in that time, don't I? So you do have different kind of chargers. That's the super fast charger where I've plugged in. You also have the slightly slower version, which would take about twice the time, so 80 minutes to get to that full charge. And then of course there's the regular home socket. That would be an overnight charge, about 8 to 10 hours. So it really depends what you want to do. And of course the app also tells you all the power charging options along your route. So even if you don't want to hang around for 40 minutes at a gas station like this one, or a power station I should call it now, as this one, you don't necessarily have to, though you may as well get a full charge while you've got an option, right? All right, so got myself a cup of coffee while I wait. And that's the catch, isn't it, with any electric car, that you will have to wait. The good news though is that I can track everything that's happening with the car right here on the app. It tells me we've still got about 37 minutes to go, and the whole process is going to take about 40 minutes anyway, as I already knew. And you know, the only challenge for me right now is to ensure that I just stick with this cup of coffee and avoid all the other temptations in here, like all the candy that's behind me.
The app is actually very easy to use and gives you all the relevant information you would need. It sends you notifications as well, and right from state of charge, with vehicle status, to of course finding the nearest charging stations with reference to your current location, it does a fair bit. You can also set the climate control to cool or warm the cabin while the car is plugged in and charging, so that way you use the station's electricity and not the batteries to get the car ready for your drive. This display tells you if the car is simply charging or charging and keeping the cabin ready with the climate control working in the background. It will also tell you when the car will be charged to the point that you have set and would be ready to go. Since I had the time, I did charge all the way to 100%, though most users would probably go to just 80. Okay, that done, let's get back on the road. Now that I had a full charge, I could play around with the car's settings and modes. The focus on straight line acceleration is obvious, and the EQC won't disappoint. Even if you're not in sport mode and you are in eco, the car will still move quickly if you want it to.
Like other Mercedes models, you have the different drive modes, so you can switch between individual, sport, comfort and eco, but there's also something called maximum range. That's of course new and specific to the EQ family. What it does is it kind of gives you a good balance to try and get the most efficient performance and of course save your battery and maximize driving range, maximum range. Now how it does that is what is really interesting. It's not just about monitoring your driving style, it's more about trying to be really optimal in terms of battery power consumption and also storage and usage to maximize range. So it also kind of ties in with the navigation system and monitors what's coming up. So if there's a very sharp bend in the road, or if there is a traffic light or a roundabout that's coming up, you don't know it, but the car will, and it adjusts your performance accordingly. So it doesn't let you kind of zoom into it and then hard brake. What it does is on the pedal, it kind of gives you a little sense of resistance. So this is one perfect point, and the car tells you, hey, buddy, that's where you need to be driving right now, and it optimizes performance. It also tracks speed limits real time, so that it kind of keeps you in check from that perspective, and like I said, gives you the best possible performance to save maximum battery power. Also new, also interesting. So while that is very intelligent and gives you, of course, greater range, it can be a little annoying because you're trying to sort of find that optimal performance. You're thinking, hey, I want to accelerate, and the car doesn't really move. But remember that it's just trying to actually be more efficient for you. And after a while, you get used to it. And eventually you realize it's not like it's really slowing you down, because especially in traffic or city driving situations, it still gets you there in the same amount of time pretty much.
So yes, if you want quick response, then stay out of maximum range mode, and frankly, staying in eco is not too bad.
Now, like all EVs of late, this car as well has regenerative braking. There's different modes, so you can go from D-, which is maximum regenerative power being stored. That's almost that single pedal driving use that you can do. You don't really have to use the brake then, and I actually quite like using that mode. It's very easy to get used to, like in some of the other cars. Then there's D-, where it's just about 30% of regeneration, and then there's just D, where it's 20%. But there's also D+, where there is no resistance, and so there is no regenerative power being produced or stored, and the car just kind of rolls along like it kind of would in neutral, but with a little sense of traction. So, you know, if you don't really want to have that sense of the car pulling you back or braking, you can put it in D+. But the big change is that when you use, by the way, you use the paddle shift that's been provided here just to switch between those regenerative modes. And so if you long hold it, it switches to D Auto, and that's new. So what that does is it monitors your driving style, the kind of performance you're expecting from your drive, and also what it needs to do in terms of still feeding some battery power back in. So it kind of balances that out and gives you the optimal sense of performance and regeneration without sort of coming in your way. That's pretty innovative, pretty intelligent, and pretty different.
While the different regen modes help with the car's handling too, the impression you get is that the bias on the chassis tuning is towards ride quality. The EQC has a very comfortable ride, but large potholes or undulations do carry through quite literally given the vehicle's weight. The GLC's suspension does quite well overall, but you know straight away that sporty handling is not the EQC's forte.
So bottom line, the whole focus seems to be on quietness, refinement, and a sense of luxury. You certainly know straight away you're driving a Mercedes-Benz. That character comes through. Is it sporty? No. It's not necessarily the most fun car to drive, but it's certainly not one of those boring EVs that has a golf cart kind of quality. It will give you a fair amount and certainly make Mercedes-Benz fans extremely happy and reassured to know that even in the EV space, their brand kind of stays true to what its character is all about. And now, for what it's worth, after all the efficient driving, one little burst in sport. Instant torque, you beauty you.
Yes, there was fun to be had, and I wasn't about to miss out on that chance. The EQC is not coming to India anytime soon, though it isn't ruled out in the long term. As India gets more and more EVs over time, it is the inevitable luxury vehicle offering for the status-conscious buyer. Let's see the response to the Jaguar I-Pace next year, eh? The EQC is not cheap, and so in many markets, especially like here in Norway, it would rely on government incentives to seem like a viable option for regular buyers. In India, we continue to hope that there is some thought to incentivizing electrics now from the newly re-elected government.